So Carlos Reyes asked an awesome question, and I know a lot of you have this exact question yourself. So how should I prioritize paying off debt versus saving and investing? Great question, Carlos. Let's break it down. So there's a 6-step framework I'm going to walk you through today of how to decide this question. And so if you guys have additional questions for the podcast, feel free to drop below in the show notes, and I will get to it. And I will answer in a future podcast episode. So the first step of the 6-step process I want to walk you through when assessing this very, very detailed question. It's a question I get often, and it's not as easy as just saying like this or that. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's a mixture depending on the situation, but every situation is different. So I want to give you a framework to operate within because I want you to be able to apply this to your life in particular. So there's a few things that we're going to need to gather. That's step one. What information do we need to gather to make the best decision possible for our particular situation? So we're going to need 3 key financial statements. And the reason why is because we need to find out, number one, what our clearly defined cash position is currently as of today. So when we're assessing our debt and our savings and our investments, I have to know where I sit today from a cash position. Some people are incredibly inefficient. Some people have zero cash at all and almost are, barely paying the bills. So there's a difference in wide variance of people cash position that they need to assess. If they have too much cash on hand, it would be an opportunity to take some of that cash and adjust it. And we'll talk about that in a second. But if we are way low, we might need to save up for the next decision that we're going to make between paying off debt and saving and investing. So we need to get a balance sheet that lists all of our assets and liabilities. Cash is an asset. Cash will be listed as of this point in time. Let's say it's today, as of today, as of 3/31, as of 6/30. It's going to say how much cash do I currently have in hand with my checking account, savings account, whatever, wherever else you hold cash, right? So I need to know what my clearly defined cash position is because that's some leverage I could potentially use. My second thing is a budget. So most people only do a budget. They only know a budget. That's why the balance sheet's so important, but also another financial statement I'm going to list in a second. But the budget, I have to know what my budget looks like because I need to know what my recurring true free cash flow is monthly. How much money do I have on a monthly basis to then go put towards my goals, which in this situation, paying off debt versus saving and investing. Obviously, Carlos looks like he's a step ahead of the game to where he's making a good decision for his future, and he's trying to figure out how to optimize which place to put these dollars. And so if you know your recurring true free cash flow, every single month, your income minus your bare minimum expenses, what is that true free cash flow that you have available to then put towards your goals? I want to zero that out. I want to do a zero-based budget, don't get me wrong, but I want to first figure out what that gap is. Let's say there's a $2,000 gap. Now I know I can use $2,000 every single month to pay off my debt or save and invest, and I have an option at this point in time. So I know that number. I also know where I'm sitting. So this is giving me some leverage. This is giving me some insight that I need to make this decision to the best of my ability. The next piece of the puzzle is the amortization schedule. So you might have a list of some debts here. If we have an amortization schedule listed here, I'm going to be able to outline every debt, how much principal I'm paying, how much interest I'm paying, all of the details of the debt, and how long specifically that's going to take with the minimum payment. We can adjust with my different spreadsheets I have to figure out if we throw an extra, let's call it $500 to that $2,000 example to this debt, how quick does this pay this off? The answers are on the spreadsheets. This is where you have to do math, logic, and reasoning to get good answers. And so the more information you have, the better. The other thing I want in this equation, which we're not going to use quite yet, is a compound interest calculator. I want to make sure I know if I have to decide between paying off debt versus investing. I want to know what my outcomes are going to be in both scenarios. We'll talk about that in a second, but I want to make sure I have that at my disposal as well. So I have 3 financial statements, a balance sheet, a budget, an amortization schedule, and also a compound interest calculator. Those 4 things are what we need to gather to make a good, effective decision. Now, my step 2 is adjusting my current cash position. So in step 1, we figured out what that was on the balance sheet. It's an asset. It's part of your net worth. It's understanding. Obviously, the goal is not to hoard a bunch of cash, but if we have a bunch of cash, we need to understand what we're comfortable with. Number 1, are we current on our bills? If not, obviously that's priority. We don't even have this discussion. Now, I'm assuming Carlos is in a position where he's not barely footing his bills based on the next step of the equation. Should I pay off my debt? Should I save or invest? If yes, if you're current on your bills, what are you willing to get down to cash balance wise? Let's say you have $60,000 cash. Let's say your 3 to 6 month emergency fund is anywhere from 20 to 25,000. Well, we have a lot of extra cash on hand. The extra six, we have 60,000, let's say for round math, we have a $20,000 emergency fund we got to cover. That $40,000 gap that you have could be used to your advantage. A lot of times people will take that cash and pay off their debt right away versus just hoarding it to hoard it. A lot of times people don't understand how inefficient they are and how much that money is losing value by the second. Your purchasing power every time you hold cash, whether it be a high yield savings account or whatnot, is losing purchasing power. There is no benefit to holding cash just for the pure sake of holding cash. We want to be really, really efficient here. We want to know what our 3 to 6 month emergency fund is, maybe 1 to 2 months in your checking account. Everything over and above that, potentially opportunities, specific opportunity fund, or investments. And I want to get rid of a lot of that cash. So adjusting your cash position is key here. The other thing you want to do is consider a temporary emergency fund. So if we have like high interest debt here, which we'll talk about also in a second with the math equation, like we're probably going to address that whether or not we have an emergency fund, because the bang for your buck, the ROI and paying that debt off that's 25%, for example, is unbeatable. There's no guarantee of 25% outside of a paying off your credit card. So we want to pay that off typically, right? But we want to understand, what is that temporary emergency fund? Let's say you ideally want to get to 20. But during this debt paydown process, you're comfortable with 10 to push the needle, to use more of that cash to get into your debts or your investments or whatnot ASAP. Some people do that, especially when there's high interest debts. They bring down that temporary emergency fund. They know it's not a forever thing. They know they feel uncomfortable, but there's actually some benefit to that. When you feel uncomfortable, you do things more drastically, and you're going to therefore move a lot faster a lot of times. But some people think it's a risk. It just kind of depends. It's obviously a situational thing. I will say when we paid off debt, $76,000 in non-mortgage debt, we got down to a $2,500 cash balance in our checking account. Everything else over and above that was thrown to debt. That's how we paid it off fast. We adjusted our current cash position. A lot of that. Step 2 was a big piece of this. The other thing to consider as part of step 2 is consider non-cash assets. So a lot of times I tell people, hey, you could sell your car. You could sell out of old meme coins that you have or YOLO plays that you have. And so they have, I'm looking at their balance sheet and I see cum coin or some crazy coin. Yes, you heard what I just said. That's a real thing. Or, Melania coin or Trump coin or something, just no utility, no value. It's just kind of like a get rich quick type deal. And so no shots fired there. Just literally, those are the coins that I see a lot, and no one really can tell me what the values of what they are. Besides, somebody else is buying it. I want to YOLO into it and get it, and hopefully sell it for higher than I buy it. Silly mistake. Exactly what I talk against all the time. So if you have things like that, or you have a car that's paid off, for example, and it's a $25,000 value, if you sold that for $25,000, you could literally go buy a $10,000 car today, and you could take the difference. You could literally take that $15,000, put it towards debt, put it towards investments, and take a new $10,000 car paid for in cash. So you still keep a paid for cash car, but now you actually downgrade your lifestyle a little bit temporarily so that you're able to move the needle faster. We've done this so many times in our past, and it's helped a ton of times. The other thing is, if you do have like a meme coin or something you're not really like passionate about, like $600 of Bitcoin or something like that, what you could theoretically do is sell that and have 100% amount to apply towards your goals. So consider non-cash assets on the balance sheet that we talked about, because there is a lot of ability to move things around that won't be a taxable event that could really help you in the right direction. Step 1 is obviously what we need to gather. Step 2 is adjust your current cash position. So step 3, define your life goals. I think a lot of times people are so fixated on like numbers and compound interest, and they forget why they're even doing what they're doing. And I think I bring this up a lot for good reason, is because they forget the whole purpose. Money is a tool, and they become so engulfed in it that they forget the purpose is to live a better life. And so I want people to actually ask yourself, what do you truly want out of life? Not just the money, not just $2.5 million in your brokerage account. What do you really want out of life? What type of life do you want to lead? That is a huge piece of the equation. And this is not always solely math. It's going to play a role, but oftentimes math is theoretical. I'll give you a good example. This past 2 months have been a lot on my family. I've shared publicly what's been going on, but specifically we lost a home due to mold and mycotoxins, to where all belongings in that home were gone, ceased, goodbye. That move entirely to get out of the house, to remediate the house, to do all these sorts of things cost us $250,000 in cash. That was not part of my spreadsheet math. That was called life. My spreadsheet math was theoretical. This was real life. We need to make sure we're prepared for real life. We assess real life consequences, and we also think about the life that we want to lead outside of a spreadsheet, because most of your decision making is going to be done at a dinner table with your family than in a spreadsheet. So always consider that. Define your life goals, take a whiteboard out, start dreaming, take away the money for a second and just think, what does your ideal life look like? What would you like to do day to day to make an ideal life happen? Now, once we understand that, we want to go to step 4, solving the math equation. There's always math involved. There's always logic and reasoning involved, and we need to assess this. So really quick rule of thumb, if your debt is above 6%, take your true free cash flow number, assuming you've paused investments. Remember, we want to take our investments out when we're defining in step 1 our true free cash flow in our budget, our income minus our minimum expenses before all of the investments and decision-making power that we have happens. Run that through an amortization schedule. So once you understand, like, I have a debt, it's above 6%, let's say it's an 8% debt, I'm going to take that extra free cash flow that I have, and I'm going to run that through my amortization tool. That is going to show me the minimum payment plus the additional free cash flow I have. Let's just use an example of $2,000. So if I'm paying off a debt and it's going to take 12 months, but instead I put an extra $2,000 towards principal, that debt could shave from 12 months to 3 months or something like that. Figure out exactly that math equation. It's just a simple tool all my students use. It's very, very straightforward. So once you understand that, you're going to understand what that actually takes, the time it's going to take, exactly to the date, to the penny, how much it's going to be in the principal, how much it's going to be in interest. You're going to know all of the details. I want you to waterfall analysis your entire debt payoff picture. So when you're in an amortization schedule, you're making the minimum payments plus extra. When that's paid off, you move to the next debt. So you apply your minimum payment plus that additional principal payment. You add that together because that debt is now paid off. So additional minimum principal payment is going to the next debt. We're going to do a waterfall analysis all the way until the last debt is paid off above 6%. That is a very, very important piece of the equation here. Now, the thing is, we want to use those 3 financial statements that we talked about. Obviously, amortization schedule being one of those things, right? So we're going to use all of the true free cash flow to eliminate these as quick as possible. There's no guessing. So we're going to use the balance sheet, so we know the full balance of the debt at any given point in time. Remember, that's the first step. Then we're going to use the minimum payments, the budget, understanding that, and also the true free cash flow on the budget. Then we're going to apply that on the amortization schedule to understand the time to pay off the debt and how much interest there is involved in that decision. So we're going to know that answer. That's not like a guessing equation. Like, we know the answer definitively exactly. We will then get to the next step in a second. But what if your debt is below 6%? And you still have the same question that Carlos had, which was, how should I prioritize paying off debt for saving and investing? So we know anything above 6%, we're aggressively attacking all true free cash flow. There is no other decision we have here. We need to apply all of our cash to those debts. But what if you have 3% student loan? We want to assess that a little differently. So what we want to do here is, if debt is below 6%, we want to take that true free cash flow, but we want to run examples. We want to run one example of extremes. We want to do all paid off debt, which we would have already done at this point in time for debts above 6%. But even below, I would figure out that $2,000 extra dollars you have per month. If I applied that all to my debts, how fast could I pay that off? I will say, no matter the rate, we did this when I forget when it was, our first couple years of life, out of school. We had $76,000 of debt. We paused our investments because we realized, by applying all of our fundamentals and principles, we had enough free cash flow to pay off that $76,000 of debt with adjusting the cash position, everything I've talked about up to this point, to get that into a year's time frame. We paid off that debt in 1 year. So we were okay at 23 years old to pause our investing, even though it was debt below 6%, because we knew that timeline was 12 months. So if we sprinted, we could then be at 24 years old and have zero debt going forward and invest a ton of money going forward. So we knew we had some potential. So timeline does play a role. Like, people can argue the math debate all the time, but the reality is, even below 6%, if you have a quick sprint, a 3-month sprint, a 6-month sprint based on the amortization schedules, I would consider that. Why wouldn't you? Debt-free is an awesome feeling, especially in such a quick time frame when you actually do the math behind it. Now, the other thing is I want to do 100% the opposite way. What if I took that full 2000 and I applied it within my compound interest schedule over the next, 20 years? What is that going to impact me with? Now, the thing is, we can do a 20-year period, whatever, whatnot. What we want to do is when we do that compound interest schedule, we want to apply it to what the timeline would be in the debt. So if I were to, let's just say, for example, take 12 months to pay off my debt with that 2000, then apply it to the future. If I'm doing a 20-year period, I wouldn't be able to invest that 2000 until this first debt's paid off, which is, let's say an example is 12 months. So after 12 months, I have 19 years remaining. So that's the comparable I would do. 19 years with debt paid off in a year would be my first example because I would know that. And we could start to do hybrids. Like, what if I did 1500 to this debt and then the remainder 500 to this investment during the same time, and we're going to do hybrid. So 1500 would then take, let's call it 18 months, but I'd be investing $500 throughout this 18-month period. And then at the 18-month period, I'd have the full 2000 to apply to my investments. I want to run these comparables all day long, multiple times. I want to figure out what's the extreme of investing $2,000, paying the minimum of my debt for 20 years. Extreme there. I want to take the $2,000 and apply it to paying off my debt solely, no investments, see what the extreme is there, see my timelines of each, and then apply obviously the investing when you're done paying off the debt. I want to figure out what those are. On top of that, I want to do a mixture or a hybrid approach where I use some money to pay off debt, some money to invest. And does that align with my goals? This math equation, guys, should get you specifically to the timeline that you want to get to. Now, you map these out, you figure out what's most comfortable. You might come to the conclusion that like I could pay off debt within 6 months, and I also could have 500,000 at the end of 10-year period. I also could come to the conclusion I could pay this also off in 2 years instead of like 6 months. It extends 18 months, which could be good, could be bad, but my 500,000 turns to 700,000. That could also be the case. I'm just using these two tools, amortization schedules and a compound interest calculator, to do different scenarios with my true free cash flow I figured out in step number 1. That's all I'm going to do here. And the more information I know, the more scenarios I run, the better decision-making power I have, because now you get to the point of saying, what am I comfortable with leaving this debt around? Do I even care? Like, some people don't have that, like, want to pay off debt feel. Some people love to pay off debt. It just kind of depends. But that's why I'm walking you through a framework to decide for yourself what makes more sense. And I have a really good YouTube video on this as well, where it has an actual tool to help you decide on this stuff. But if you ever DM me, send me a DM. Hey, I just watched or listened to your podcast, and I would love to get that free, tool to pay off the debt. We have a great tool to help you with that. Now, step 5 is once you define the math, you understand at this point in time, you've adjusted your cash position, you've gathered everything you needed, you've defined your life goals, what you're after truly, you've solved the actual math equation of how long things are going to take logically. The next thing is I want to review this new financial plan. So let's say we define like, okay, we're going to pay this debt off in 6 months, and then we're going to invest the remaining portion after the fact. We're not going to invest anything in the first 6 months. Fine, you come to that conclusion. Is that real life? You need a defined step-by-step plan in accordance with the solution of the math equation in step 4. So you define what that is, number 1. But the second thing is fully understand the numbers at play and goal timelines. So 6 months of not investing anything and just paying off debt sounds great in theory, but is that practical for your lifestyle? Is your true free cash flow number you're even using as an input realistic? Or are you playing this game of fairy tale of, well, I hope in an ideal scenario I save $2,000, but it could be different? This is where we'll talk about in step 6 as an automation component. But I think the biggest thing here is, are you being realistic? There are things called sacrifice. There are things where short-term things look a little different than long-term. This might be one of those seasons of sacrifice versus a seasons of abundance. People that can have a lot of resistance on their chest for the longer period of time have bigger chests because they can hold it longer. They can be time under tension is longer, and therefore they get better results. Are you sacrificing, or are you building an unrealistic life? That is a very important key distinction to make. And I think a lot of people go too crazy here, and they don't think bigger picture, and they wear themselves out so quickly and nothing ever sticks. And then there's negative feelings towards money as a result because they tried to overdo it and they weren't ready for real life, repercussions. So fully understand the numbers at play, obviously, and understand the true goal timelines. Are you really going to sit there for 5 years and pay off this debt every single day? You're going to have emotions. How do you get through that? Ask yourself those questions. So think through the change that you've chosen. Is this the life you want to live? Is this temporary or permanent change? Is this sustainable? Think through this practically. I think that's such an important concept to consider when paying off or investing. And we've done this. We've went through this whole entire thing ourselves. So I understand the emotional side of this. But that gets me to step number 6. Once we definitively put this into place and we know we're going to pay this debt off in 6 months, $2,000 extra per month goes here, we need to automate this entire process. If we decide to emotionally react to our feelings throughout this process, you're not going to go into the timeline that you expected. Reverse this and you automate this process. The $2,000 automatically comes out of your student loan portal to additional principal payment. You don't have that $2,000 available because it goes straight to your payment. That's just a matter of time before it's paid off, which is 6 months, which is what we defined. There's no guessing. There's no maybe, maybe not. You will do that. The other thing you want to automate is all your bills and all of your investments, if you do have any investments in this time, and any debt pay downs, which we talked about as well. So you want to invest or automate this whole entire process, because if you're letting yourself decide emotionally, manually, when things get rough, when things get good, reverse, like you go up and down with emotions, not just always bad emotions. You could be extra bullish and make a crazy decision because you're too euphoric, right? There's bad decisions on both sides of the emotional spectrum that we have to consider. And so when you're doing this, automating this process is going to make you the most effective way. It's going to be the most effective way possible. So you got to make sure this is all automated. Now, when you automate this, typically what happens is you get raises. You find ways because you've eliminated hassle. You've eliminated that the ability to have to all that emotional brain power dedicated to manually doing your investments. It's already operating. So what your brain starts to think is, how can I make more money to speed this process up that I've already automated over here? That, my friend, is the key. This is what most of my students go through and they experience. It's something we experience. You can start to think of, how can I get a raise at work? How can I focus on that versus all my money? My money's already working. We've already built the system. It's already automated over here. That's going to continue to go regardless of what I do. So now I can focus on making money. Now, if I make more money that goes into the automation of that $2,000, let's say I make an extra $200 a month. Now it's $2,200 a month going to my debt. That's going to naturally speed that process up. I've never had one student that is so intentional with this not have that happen. They make more money, they find more money, they cut expenses, their cash flow goes up, their debt payoff timeline goes down, their investment, financial independence number shortens a ton, 20 years to 15 years to 10 years to 5 years, all because they have been intentional. They've automated this process and they walk through this framework. So let's recap how to do this and what the question was. Carlos asked, how should I prioritize paying off debt versus saving and investing? I'll walk you through a 6-step framework to define exactly that answer for you because it's different for everybody. Step 1, what you need to gather. We talked about the balance sheet, the budget, the amortization schedule, and the compound interest calculator. Step 2, adjust your current cash position. Figure out where your cash is. Take some of that cash, use it to your advantage if you can. Step 3, take away all of the numbers and define your life goals. What do you really want your life to look like? Step 4 is solve the math equation, which is very straightforward. Just figure out with the tools that we have, the amortization schedules and the compound interest calculator, scenarios of 2 extremes, and then some hybrid approaches, and figure out what works for you in your life. Step 5, review the new financial plan and be realistic with it. Is this something you can stick to? Have you built something that's sustainable? Is this short-term? Is this long-term? What is your goal? What is your plan here? Step 6 is automating that plan. Once you automate that, it's impossible to lose, assuming you don't get in your own way. Apply that 6-step framework and you will figure out if you should pay off debt or invest. And if you want to send me a DM personally to get a free tool, feel free to. And with that being said, guys, I will see you next week.
You've been listening to Money on My Mind with your host, Brendan Schlagbaum. If you found value in today's discussion, share it with someone who could benefit from it too. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, so you never miss a money mastery tip. Until next time, stay passionate about your financial journey and keep taking bold steps towards your money goals.